dropping into something later on. I'll turn on the captions as well, so you can hopefully see what I'm saying there. Good. Good. Okay, so this question. We're going to try and do these things, and that's based on the fact that, of course, whenever we do these questions, they're based on 3 assessment objectives. You can see that there, 3 assessment objectives, which is AO1, knowledge, AO2, analysis, AO3, evaluation, and they're in equal parts. And virtually every question we do, apart from one on the American paper, a very small question on there, has those 3 elements to it. So hopefully the plan we're going to do today will get you to consider all 3 of those parts, and then you'll write a brilliant essay and you'll all get A's from it. We'll start with some AO1 stuff, which is all about knowledge, of course. And this, we can't quite do this in the same way that we would in the classroom. I'm just going to sit back a little bit because it's a bit bright. So if you can see this next to me, there's a 6x6 grid. The only reason it's 6x6 is so that we can play in the classroom with dice. And we often throw 2 dice 3 times so that we can connect 3 words together and see if there's a link between them. You can do other things with this 6x6, like identify, for example, which of these are modern liberal things and which of them are classical liberals. Or you can see if you can attribute each one to, or which ones belong to key thinkers. I should point out the ones in bold, like, for example, foundational equality or negative freedom, they are ones that are specified by the exam board as key terminology. And so that's the kinds of things that the examiners are looking for. But actually, all of this is vocabulary, which if you use this, it's not normal everyday speech. Immediately begins to earn you some AO1 points, because the examiners can say, oh, look, it's got really good, lots and lots of political vocabulary in it. So these are the words we will. Any further, are there any words on here that you're just completely not sure about, or you want me to explain or give a bit more clarification on? I'll pause for a moment there. Let me know. What's the original position? Good question, Tegan. Okay, so this is related, of course, to John Rawls, modern liberal. And you remember that he talked about the veil of ignorance, and that veil of ignorance being based on the idea that if you were dropped at random somewhere in the world, would that be a just place? Would justice be there? And what he argues is that in order to understand the unfairness that exists in society today, what we've got to do is imagine that we don't know anything about ourselves. So the original position is where you don't know what background you come from, you don't know what country you're going to be dropped into, you don't know anything about any of your social networks or any of the kind of other resources which are going to be available to you. If that's the case, and you're going to be dropped and you don't know any of those things, what would you want to be in place when you are dropped at random somewhere in the world? So he would say to me, look, the original position is you have to forget that you're white and that there are some advantages that come with that. Forget that you're in a middle-class profession and there are some advantages that come with that. Forget that there was a state provided university education system that gave you all sorts of advantages. And therefore, what would you want there to be in place? So they're related to those two. Tegan, is that okay? The original position is forget everything you knew about all the advantages you think you would normally have. Yeah, good, okay. And any others? Mechanistic theory. Yeah, good one, Lily. I think, I can't remember whether I mentioned this in one of the explainer videos. I've certainly talked about it in some of these Google Meet sessions before, but there are very, very few places where we're going to make a direct contrast or a direct reference to other ideologies, and this is one of them. So normally the questions are all going to be about internal divisions and discussions between liberalism or internal divisions and discussions between conservatism. But we describe liberalism as a mechanistic approach, and different features of liberalism as mechanistic because they're not like conservatism. So this is why there is a little bit of a contrast. So for example, when you've been looking at, with Dom, at traditional conservatism, it talks a lot about organicism and about the way in which little platoons of people manage to coalesce around traditions and conventions, and nobody designs those conventions. They just kind of grow of their own accord because they appear to work, and then we keep them around because they appear to work. And that's why conservatives don't want to change things, because what there is appears to work, and therefore we should just not disrupt tradition. Liberals are different, because liberals say, look, we think that society should be changed, and we think, therefore, you can design things into society that will make it better, that will make people more free. So we're not going to leave society to just carry on as it is. We're going to design a new constitution. We're going to design a means of running government which deposes the old ruler and puts a new one in place. And when we do so, it'll be like we're pulling a lever, and then that will create more freedom. So that's why it's mechanistic. It's because they're forms into society in order to achieve a particular outcome, rather than letting society just take its course. Is that okay, Lily? Great. Okay, good stuff. And so I'll move on, because obviously, you know, no, you're welcome, because we haven't got all afternoon. If there are any others on there that you don't want to ask about now, but you want to ask me by email or something like that, then of course, yeah, feel free to. Okay. So yeah, these other activities I've put on here, I think the Kahoot might be the same one as we did last week, actually. We'll see. But you can have a play with it. The question rally is something, I think, yeah, okay. The question rally is something I do in classroom. We're not going to do it now. Occasionally we've done these types of things where I've given you a kind of series of questions, a pile of questions on your table, and then one person from your table brings them out to me, and I check to see whether you've got the right answers, and we have a discussion about what you could do to change it, and then you feed back to the rest of the class and so on. So that's why this is on here on this PowerPoint. The only reason I've left it in, even though we're not in classroom and all the rest of it, is because I think if before you write the essay, you quickly have a look at these and think, you know, do I know what these mean? Could I identify 3 ways in which the Liberals agree on the state? That's going to be important for our first paragraph. And disagree? Well, that's basically what the question is going to be about. And could I recognize, you know, which main idea is attributed to each key thinker? If you can do those things, then you're on the way to kind of like putting together at least some basic knowledge. So it's for what I normally do is it's just a preparation, like a recap. Okay. So we'll skip that one there. And this is what I've said before, you could use those 6x6 words. So we've got some key concepts. We've got some AO1 there. The other thing you're going to need to make use of is key thinkers. The reason why we want to make use of key thinkers is because when we're looking at, you know, politics is one of those things I've mentioned to you before, I think, that everybody gets it right. So how do we then give out grades to people? Well, some people get it more right than others, and that's because their level of understanding is more in-depth, more detailed, more sophisticated than some other people's. And so one way of demonstrating your depth of understanding is by the way in which you take a set of ideas, like a strand of liberalism, and then you're able to show how well you can illustrate that with the work of key thinkers. So it's worth us being able to identify which ones are which. I don't think I want to spend a long time on this now, because I've put the answers on here as well, but all I did with this, and I think I meant you know, for you to do a kind of like testing activity. We might do 2 or 3 just to see what we think. I've dropped in some quotation. It's not necessarily the case that you have to use actual quotations of a key thinker in a paragraph. It's more important that you use an idea. Almost all of them have got a catchphrase, you know, so almost all of them have got like 2 or 3 words which we associate with them. So with Mill, we say harm principle. You know, with Rawls, we say veil of ignorance. With Locke, we talk about consent and property. And so long as you can attribute them in the paragraph somewhere to the rest of the main strand that you're talking about, you'll be on the right track. Well, I don't know, we'll pick a couple of these just to see whether we could identify them. Well, this one over on the left-hand side here. Women may ask, is this all? Anybody want to have a guess at that one? So women may ask, is this all, is our guess over here. It's a woman, so, you know, it's going to kind of narrow our options probably in terms of liberal thinkers. Hello. I think you were writing Betty Friedan. Yeah, okay, Lily. Yeah, okay, good, excellent. Thanks for playing along, Lily. I don't think we'll do too many more of these because it will take forever to do so. But yeah, you're right. So in this case, what we do is we take this quotation, and what we'd want to do then is say, well, why does she say this? You know, so you would drop a quotation and you'd say, well, what she meant by this was, and what Betty Friedan means by this when she's talking about American housewives in the 1950s and 60s is that they have legal equality. They have the right to vote. They have political and legal and social rights, well, political and legal rights, but yeah, they're still not free. They're still not able to fully develop in the way in which they would want to. And what's stopping them becoming full human beings and being limited instead to being the primary caregiver is cultural conditioning, male domination of employment, and that's why the state needs to take some action in order to make women more free. So you can see what I mean here is that the idea is you use a quotation, but you don't just drop the quotation in. You then expand upon how this then relates to their ideas. Look, the answers are here for these ones. I'll only pause for a moment here and just ask you, are there any on there that you would have difficulty interpreting or difficulty understanding why that person would say that? That's an opportunity just can you all read them okay for a start? Is it big enough? Just about. Okay. Guess it depends on the size of screen you're using as well. So I'll pause for a minute just to see if there's any of those that you want me to expand upon. Excuse me, I've got coffee today. Okay, so I stopped for about 60 seconds there, and if you want to ask me about any of those, then you can do, but I'm going to assume that you're okay with those, and feel free to come back to me later on with them. So we've got some key concepts. Excuse me. So we've got some key concepts and we've got some key thinkers. Now let's have a look at the question. Now, I'm showing you this partly because as you're moving into the second year, and if you ask the second years, they'll tell you that we're looking at this constantly. What kind of exam questions have been set, and how we can prepare for them. So you can never guess exactly what the question's going to be, but there are some kind of common types. And with the 24-mark questions, this is especially true. So what I've put on here as a link is actually to this spreadsheet. And that's going to come up there, okay. And you can see here on this spreadsheet, I know the writing will be really small where you are, but obviously you can click on the PowerPoint, you can open it yourself. So I'll not make it any bigger right now. But where in column D, everywhere it says 24-mark questions, These are all ones that are going to be about either liberalism or capitalism or conservatism rather, or socialism or feminism. So for us, they're a really good way of seeing what type of thing we can expect to see in next June when you do the real exam. And I'm showing you them partly because you'll see that most of them, oh me, gosh, most of them have a very easy to kind of easy to predict form. So for example, this one at the top here, to what extent do conservatives agree about human nature? Okay. Or we've got another one which says, to what extent, down at line 82, to what extent do liberals support equality? Or, I think it was probably one on socialism as well, find. Well, actually, or the one I'm going to, yeah, okay. To what extent are socialists committed to equality of outcome? And the one I've chosen for you to do, which we'll come back to in a moment here, is about liberalism, of course, which is, to what extent do liberals disagree over the role of the state? So you can say that, so you see that this is a, you know, it's a very typical sort of question which is designed either by the exam board or there's been on a past exam paper. And the part of the point about this spreadsheet is this exists, by the way, on the Politics Google site. So in the exam focus bit of the Politics Google site, you'll find this there as well as in the link that I've put into this PowerPoint. So you can use this to kind of practice and, you know, when we get back after the summer, in the second year, you'll find that lots of people are kind of like doing revision of last year's stuff by just doing lots of past paper questions and bringing them to me and Dom to mark. Okay, so if that is where all the other questions are, I thought I'd show you this so you can see that I'm not lying about what's typical. This was a question, and I'm pointing here at June 2019. This was on last year's paper, right? So to what extent do different conservatives disagree about society? That could so easily have been, to what extent do different socialists disagree about society, or to what extent do different liberals disagree about society, and so on. Bear in mind the green thing. This is not the question that I'm setting for you, nor is it the one that Dom's setting for you either. Okay, so how to tackle a 24-mark question. This is the kind of the meat of what we're going to talk about for the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, I suppose. You know that there are 3 separate assessment objectives. They're each worth 8 marks. And therefore, we want to do the things that help us score the most marks in each of those assessment objectives. So AO1, knowledge. We've got to know what we've just been talking about. Key concepts, different strands, key thinkers, and to be able to apply them accurately, okay? AO2 is about analysis, and this is where, hopefully I'm going to show you in the way in which you write your paragraphs, that this is where the tension comes in, where the disagreement comes in, the way in which there is contrast. Not just that they say different things, but those different things actually disagree with each other, that, you know, one comes into conflict with the other. Up to level 2 or 3. Level 4 and 5 is, why do they disagree? Because that, after all, is analysis. Not only being able to demonstrate that there is disagreement, but thinking about what it is about their different positions, which has led them to different conclusions about what they think should happen in society. So here, for example, we'll be thinking about the fact that in the terms of the state, modern liberals and classical liberals disagree about the state, and the reason why they disagree about the extent to which the state should interfere, for example, in the economy, is because modern liberals are interested in an enabling state, whereas classical liberals think that the state should be minimal, should be limited. Okay, and then finally, we're thinking about evaluation. If this is the case, why does it matter? And if you think about policy of the 20th century, then it's clear that modern liberals, when they think about the enabling state, the implications of that was to create massive public sector programs and a massive welfare state and a huge range of things which would be there to narrow the gap between rich and poor. And with that, some important implications for what kind of state we would be looking at. Whereas classical liberals, and we saw that in the last 40 years, Their different view of the state and what the state should be involved in then led to a destruction of welfare, a destruction of public sector, and an increase in inequality. So we want to talk about the implications of if there is a conflict, where does that conflict lead? I'm going to pause for a moment in case I've gone too fast, or if there's anything you want to ask. Great, okay. So here's the structure. Now this is the important bit, because these 24-mark questions are different from the other ones. The 30-mark questions that we've been looking at for most of the year, whether they're source questions or other ones, are based on the idea that you'd have 45 minutes to write, 3/4 of an hour to write. So that meant the paragraphs that you wrote would typically be about 10.5 minutes, and then you could write about 3/4 or 4/5 of a side. And with this one, you only get 30 minutes. So if you tried to write 4 paragraphs in the 30 minutes with an introduction and a conclusion, they're going to be too short and they're going to be too superficial. If you only do 2 paragraphs and agree and disagree, you're probably not going to be able to look at enough different aspects of disagreement. Therefore, you're going to lose marks in terms of breadth. So this is why this is a better plan, I think, where what we end up doing is trying to write 3 8-minute paragraphs and then topped and tailed by a short introduction and conclusion. Now, you'll notice, if you're very sharp-eyed, that that means they're not balanced, that there's more disagreement, 2 paragraphs for disagreement, than there is for agreement. And that's because that reflects the nature of the specification and the nature of the way in which we've taught it, which is to say that we've spent usually a couple of lessons looking at their core beliefs, and then the rest of the time has been about the different strands and the different tensions within it. So there's much more scope for the AO2 stuff, much more scope to talk about the fact that they disagree and how they disagree and why they disagree, than there is really to talk about. You're always going to write for these 24-mark questions 2 disagree paragraphs and 1 agree paragraph. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, good stuff. As I say, this isn't like the only way that you can ever see one of these questions answered. But it is a really good way, I think, and it's a pretty good principle and habit to get into, which will help you kind of achieve a kind of level of consistency and probably make it easy to think your way around planning these ones. Here's how not to do it, okay? Some of you might have looked at this already. I think I've talked to people about this certainly when we've been doing these Google Meets as well. The temptation for lots of students, and this is the most common problem, which is why I'm making a big thing of it now. The temptation for this is, because you now know lots of things about each of the key thinkers and lots of the strands, is to tell the examiner what you know. And that might seem like an obvious thing to do. So if the question says, okay, to what extent do liberals disagree about the role of the state? Your temptation is to say, well, classical liberals think this about the state, and this is why they think this about the state. And for example, John Locke says this about the state, and John Stuart Mill also says this about the state. And what you could do is come up with a really good, description of what classical liberals think about the state, with excellent use of key thinkers and a really good range of vocabulary. And then you might follow that with a second paragraph that says, however, modern liberals don't think the same. This is what they think about the state. And then go on to tell me all about the enabling state and John Rawls and so on. But what you'd end up doing is having 2 blocks of description and not any analysis. And even though you've got that little bit at the beginning of the second paragraph that says, however, modern liberals don't think this, that's not actually making a comparison between the 2. Examiners will see that as simply 2 different blocks of AO1, and therefore they won't give you any AO1 and AO2 for it. So instead, what we're aiming to do is not have that, but to have them interlaced, okay? So within your paragraph, what you're looking to do is to make them, almost every sentence is alternately about either modern liberalism or classical liberalism. or at least, one strand and then another, so that the sentence has in it somewhere whereas or by contrast. And here I've done some, but you would have worked this out yourself. So, so whereas classical liberals argue that there should be a minimal state, modern liberals reject this view and argue instead that there should be an enabling state. Why do they think that? And then you'd want to be able to, this is because classical liberals think this, whereas modern liberals think this. For example, John Locke says this, whereas John Rawls argues this. So it's always making the comparison between within the paragraph rather than two separate blocks. Okay, that sounds easy to say. It's actually quite, when you plan it, it's a little bit more difficult to do. But how does that sound? Oh, I have to go for another Google Meet. Okay, Kate, don't worry, that's fine. Let me know if you have any problems with it, but that's absolutely fine. Okay, so yeah, I recognize that I normally schedule these for half an hour. We always go over about 10 more minutes if you've got time. How does that sound about the alternate sentences within the paragraph rather than blocks? Is that nice and clear? Great stuff. Okay, thanks, Tegan. So these are the kind of things then we're looking to put in our agree paragraph. You can see it's all about core beliefs. So, when we're thinking about liberals and the state, that consent. All liberals think about the idea the state should be limited in some way. We should have a set of rules, constitution. All liberals think that the state is necessary because we don't want to be left to our own devices. We require a state to protect all of our rights. So there's plenty for us to go on there. There's even more to go on when we talk about disagree paragraphs. And here I've made the point that we're always talking about one strand versus another, depending on how many we've got. Okay, so what does a good paragraph look like? Here's one as an example. Let's see which one I put on here now. That one. Yeah. So when you click on that link, what you'll see is this one, evaluate the extent to which different types of conservatives disagree about society. I put that one in because that was a question last year. So I basically just picked a paragraph that I thought would reflect that question. And I didn't do one on liberalism because I didn't just want to kind of like write it for you. And what I'd normally do in the lesson is say, okay, well, look, here's 3 highlighters. See if you can find out where's the AO1, the AO2, and the AO3, because I think this is a good paragraph. We're in lockdown and it's more difficult to do, and I can't just kind of like flip from table to table and have a chat with you about it this time. So I've done it for you, okay? So you can see for yourself where I think there's AO1 and AO2 and AO3 in particular. And in your own time, don't do it now, you can
evaluation.
Yeah.
Why does it
click on my moat word things so you can see I've given like a kind of commentary of why this is in this paragraph and why I think it's useful. So hopefully that'll be I would look at that before you write your own paragraph so you can see, okay, this is why I should have this kind of sentence at the beginning of it. Do you want to ask anything about that? Lovely. Okay, I'll move on. So this is our question then, right? To what extent do liberals disagree about the state? How do we feel about this? Okay. We'll think it's kind of, hopefully you'll think if it's a sort of manageable question, it's not too complicated, not too difficult to understand what the question is getting at. Here's a little bit more help in case you haven't already looked at it. So the first one is about a template, and the reason I'm asking you to look at the template for this one is because I want to use the same. Here we go. I wanted to use the same template for every 24-mark question because this really does work. So when you're planning them, you can see this one I've left blank. To what extent the different types of insert ideology differ over insert key theme. And you'll see the main bit is first paragraph agreement, second paragraph divergence, third paragraph this one. In this case, I think I've put this in the post, but on the classroom post, but if I haven't, I'll add it to it now. I've actually made one for you. Where are we? Oops. Yeah, here we go. On this question. Okay, so this is basically the answers. And it's because I wanted you to have the easiest experience of putting one of these together, given that we're in kind of like difficult circumstances. So you can see here the things that liberals agree over. All you've got to do is show why they all believe those things. And if you can support that with some key thinkers, then that would be really useful too. So for tolerance, for example, I think you could talk about John Stuart Mill, and you can talk about Betty Friedan. And similarly with the idea of consent, I think you can also talk about Mary Wollstonecraft and Betty Friedan in there as well, to talk about why they both agree with those. And then 2 paragraphs about divergence. I don't know whether it's clear for you to be able to see this from when you're looking at this, but so I'll say it now. The first paragraph about disagreement, divergence, disagreement, is about the enabling state and its role in the economy, and therefore positive and negative liberty and so on. Okay. The second one is much more about social liberalism and the extent to which the state takes action to support equality of opportunity for some people, or just treats everybody the same. So that's why there's a difference between the two. And that's what I mean, I think, about the fact that this is quite a good plan for being able to say, not just here's some agreements and here's some disagreements, but within the disagreements, there are 2 very distinct areas in which modern liberals disagree with classical liberals, or vice versa. Okay, so that's your plan. And then the only other things I put on here are the mark scheme. Oops, which is here, where you're looking at level 5 and you're aiming to think, okay, if I put in some knowledge, is it knowledge? Have I just dropped a concept in, or is it in-depth knowledge with a really deep understanding of the concepts and theories that people have used? How have I shown that those concepts? How have I shown my understanding of those concepts? And then this Google Doc thing is basically this, which is a summary which I made last year after the exam, after 2019. So basically, when we started the year in August, I was teaching socialism and feminism, and I wanted to show the current second years what the examiners had thought about the ideology questions that had been on the paper, and as well as some of the things you've already seen in here, then it's got examiners' comments. I think I want to highlight one thing on here, because it came up in another discussion that people were having, and it's about parties. And since we've been talking about liberalism, should you talk about the Liberal Democrats? So if you've been talking about conservatism, should you talk about the Conservative Party? We talk about socialism after the summer, should you talk about Labour? And the quick answer is no. There's a temptation, I think. One of the questions someone asked earlier on in the week was, if we can talk about the fact that there are both neoliberals, like Thatcher is an 19th century conservative, but there are other sorts of conservatives, should we then talk about the fact that there's a broad, the Conservative Party is a broad church? And the short answer is no, not in this bit. Talk about that in a question about conservatives in the rest of the paper. You can't see what I'm pointing at, in the rest of the paper, but in this case, it's about the ideology and about the key thinkers, and we should leave parties out of it. Okay? Doesn't mean you can't quote people like Thatcher. It just means we're not interested in what impact it has on parties themselves, or what it means for the shape of those parties, or the tendencies within them. Okay, so I think that is all of the things that I wanted to suggest to you about this. I won't know whether I've done my job of explaining how you should answer this question, unless you can say, okay, is everybody happy enough with that one? Yeah, you've got a kind of week and a half to do it, I think, more or less. And you can always email me if you've got any problems with it. But But if you're happy, yeah, okay, great stuff. If you're happy, then crack on, and I'll look forward to reading those soon. Please have a think about that question magazine. It'd be great to see some of your ideas in there as well. Partly because there'll be a really good example for the prospective politics students to see what good quality writing looks like as well. Okay, but in the meantime, I'll speak to you soon. Bye. Hi, Janet.
There we go. Hello.
There you go. Hi. You all right?
Yeah. Are you?
Yeah, not bad. Yeah.